I was the officer in charge of optical instrumentation at Vandenberg Air Force Base in the 1369th Photo Squadron. And as such, it was my duty to supervise the instrumentation photography of every missile that went down the Western Test Range. In those days we called them ICBMs, inter-county ballistic missiles, because most of them blew up on launch, and our job was to determine why they blew up, to provide the engineers good enough engineering sequential photography so that they could see what was wrong with the bird as it took off in flight. What we photographed up there affected me for the rest of my life and made a huge impact on my understanding of the universe and of governmental manipulation of our minds. The purpose of them was they were ballistic missiles. They were to deliver nuclear weapons on targets. That's what they were there for. We weren't launching real nuclear weapons. We were launching dummy warheads. They were the exact size, shape, and dimension and weight of a nuclear warhead. For my stunning achievement in finding a place where I could look back at Vandenberg Air Force Base from up north, and for figuring out how to transmit the timing up there, and for getting the thing set up, I was awarded the Air Force Guided Missile Insignia. I was the first photographic officer in the Air Force to get they called it the missile badge. And it was a highly coveted thing at the time. It was definitely in 1964, because Florence Mansman confirmed that, and he knew. He had written it down and knew the exact date of it. They counted down the missile. We heard engine ignition, lift off. We knew the missile was